So good evening again, everybody. Thanks for joining this evening. It's warm outside. It's relatively sunny. Light is coming back into the world. It's very exciting. So I appreciate y'all for spending some time watching this presentation on email etiquette, which I promise will not be painless. My name is AJ Ehrenstein. I'm Assistant Vice President for Lifelong Success at the college. One of the things that I oversee is Beyond Barnard, and we're the hub, obviously, for all things having to do with career development support, advising on finding internships and applying to jobs, getting funding for unpaid internships, advice on graduate school, professional school, and competitive fellowships. And of course, we're the hub for support on campus roles, student jobs supported by financial aid. For those of you who are here tonight who have a current campus role, or if you're watching the recording at home, please make sure you put in your time because this is part of Beyond Barnard's 3-part professional development series. And for those of you in campus roles, you can put in time to be compensated for coming to these as part of your work. This is an exciting, relatively new thing that began last year, and we're continuing and expanding this year. You'll continue to receive updates about upcoming professional development seminars throughout the course of the semester after tonight's event. Just keep an eye on your inbox. So tonight's topic is, again, emails in the workplace, an introduction. And I weirdly love geeking out about emails. I may be the only one. But I do love talking about this stuff. This is one of my favorite presentations to give. And so I promise this will be relatively painless and hopefully even a little bit fun. What am I going to do? What am I going to do over the course of the next roughly 45 minutes? And then we'll leave time for questions at the end. First, I want to provide a sense of introductions, not only to emails as a genre, but also a little bit to who I am and where I'm coming from. I'll go through some very tactical email do's, and then follow up with the much funnier email don'ts. And I don't want anybody to cringe too hard in the background. We've all made mistakes on email. We've all written excellent emails. So don't worry if you've done some of these things before and they're in the don't pile, you're not alone. A lot of us have hit send on an email with a horrible amount of typos, or hit send on an email that we later felt bad about. So, don't feel too bad. Tonight we're learning best practices and moving forward from here. And then again, we'll finish up with some questions and answers. Okay, so let's start off about me, because I know some names here, but I don't know you all. I've been at Barnard for 5 years as of just a couple of weeks ago. I'm super excited. I'm now officially a grad student at Barnard. I've been here for long enough. I've gotten my undergraduate degree and I'm on to my master's at least. I live in Brooklyn with my wife, Gina. That's she and I after our first night of full sleep in months because we were in Mexico City. I don't know if anybody's been to Mexico City on the call, but if you want to throw an emoji up, do it. I wish there was a like good food emoji I could use because it's like literally the best food in the world. We got away and left our son, Cam, who's here bouncing around in his chair. We left him with my parents over the weekend and my sister. That's these guys. These are the OG Ehrensteins, my parents and my sister. I'm from Mount Vernon, Money Earned in Mount Vernon, just north of the city. If anybody is from Westchester, throw it in the chat. The Westchester is the best Chester, of course. I'm an absolute maniac about New York pizza. I spent 7 years of my life in Chicago, so I've been catching up for all the pizza I missed out in New York now that I'm back here close to my hometown. I am a dog person, and there are only 2 types of people in this world, dog people and evil people. That's a joke for everybody because y'all are cat people. I know there's so many cat people at Barnard, but I have a very special relationship. That's my mother-in-law's dog, Murphy. On the side, outside of Barnard, that next picture is an image that was done for a piece that I wrote about a kind of forgotten Black woman tennis player around the turn of the last century named Elsie Connick. I write on the side, I write about the things that are interesting to me. So I've actually written for the Times about resumes. I've written for the Paris Review about cover letters. I love to explore the implications of writing best practices for genres where we're all terrified of writing. So I like writing about that, but that piece about Elsie Connick, she turns out to have been the first African-American athlete on the cover of a magazine in the United States. And I was a big tennis player growing up. and her history was really interesting to me. I'll throw a link in the chat. It's a really fun essay to write. And the last thing is, of course, I am a huge fan of Barnard. I've been here for 5 years. I'm not allowed to tell you if that is if that is me in the Millie costume on a 100-degree day in July a couple of years ago, but you can use context clues. You're very bright. So you decide for yourself if that's me or not. And I use he, him pronouns. All right, so to our topic. I like to connect with you all. Workplace email, in other words, is a whole vibe. And I'm not sure if I am using that correctly. But what I mean by it is to say it causes a kind of undue amount of stress. I think that arriving in a professional workplace, including arriving at college, and for many of you all, college is also your professional workplace insofar as you have a job on campus. How to communicate with people via email in a professional context can be a pretty steep learning curve. It has its own rules. It has its own generic, which is to say its own genre connections, or sorry, its own generic, its own rules of the genre. And those rules can be largely hidden. Email is a genre that we mobilize every day, but we very, very rarely talk about. And I think part of that is that we just assume that we know how to communicate with one another. We can translate the way that we use everyday speech, everyday office interactions and such, and have a good idea of how to create and craft good, effective emails. I worry very often, and maybe this is a concern that some of you all have, that some of our worst tendencies in social media have begun to migrate over, or not even begun at this point, but they have really started to be present in email. And one of the claims that I'd like to make today is email is not social media. It is not the way that we communicate with one another in text or chat or Slack or other workplace forms of communication that you may mobilize on a regular basis. It is instead an entirely different genre that rewards an understanding of the rules. What are the rules? And I love this, this Vermeer. Make sure that when you're writing emails, you always have a sweet writing vest picked out. I'm going to go through some of these rules across the remainder of the presentation, but I want you to be cognizant of the ways in which some of the rules of emails as a genre also can be taken directly from your first year writing seminar, from good rules for argumentative papers and essays. And some rules are kind of the opposite to what you learn in the classroom. And so I think it's important here to pause and reflect a little bit on the ways that emails can reward some of the same things that you do every day in writing papers for humanities or social sciences classes, or the way that you present data in labs, et cetera. And in some cases, you are actually trained ineffectively for the purposes of writing good emails. So let me go through the bullets and I'll elucidate some of the things I mean there. So the first thing is you should think about context and audience every time you write an email to someone. That seems pretty much true for argumentative writing as well. When you're thinking about an essay for a course, when you're thinking about an assignment that's asking you to reach out to non-experts, experts, et cetera, you're thinking consciously about how to reach the audience. I think that's good practice. However, emails ask you to orient around tasks, not to make arguments. And in fact, making arguments in email can be really ineffective in accomplishing your goal. The more complicated your argument is, the less effective email is going to be as a means of delivering that argument in almost all cases. One of the things that I'll argue later in the do's versus don'ts is that some emails really should just be, instead of 3,000 word screeds making an argument, they should be 20-word short bits asking for time to talk face-to-face or on the phone or on Zoom with someone. Emails do reward ensuring that you have a clear main point. So just like argumentative essays that you're writing for classes, you want to make sure that the kind of purpose of your email is stated right at the top. I am emailing to what? Make it clear to the reader exactly why you're reaching out. But similar to the notion that you should be orienting around tasks, accomplishing something, scheduling a meeting, getting a project finished, and not arguing. Emails are about aligning expectations and moving people forward rather than convincing or dragging people into your way of thinking. So again, you're used to writing from argument, making claims, and using evidence to back those claims in the writing that you're doing in the classroom. In the context of writing effective emails, you're trying to get the person who's receiving the email to be on the same page as you. So just like argumentative essays, you should be considering form and content together. So it's not just about what your argument is in an essay, it's about how you're making it. And that's similar to emails. But again, instead of making an argument, you want to think about how you're going to clearly make your point, how to clearly get your point across. I'm a huge fan. I would love to, if any of y'all want to throw maybe a laugh cry emoji up, I send you guys tons of emails. And I would say that some of these emails break some of these conventions because of how much information you need to get from me about various things. But I am a maniacal user of bullet points. I use bolds and italics very scarcely to really emphasize points. I'm constantly thinking about when to use colors, highlights, different color text in order to make it clear where the reader's attention needs to be. You need to think constantly about how you're mobilizing the ways that you can manipulate text in an email to get your point across. Make it easy to respond. One of the things that I find very challenging about student emails in many cases is that the number of questions or the number of requests being made in a single piece of email correspondence is so many, it's going to take me 25 to 30 minutes just to come up with a reasonable way to address each of the questions. And so very often I'll respond to a student with many questions or many requests. I'll respond very quickly just to say, I've received your email. It would be great to just take 30 minutes and chat through this because I think it would be more efficient. That is to say, I want to work to minimize responses. Email is one genre that tends to proliferate, right? When emails are ineffective, you end up with these streams that are like 80 and 90 different messages long. But effective emails work to minimize their proliferation. In other words, effective emails typically accomplish a task and allow folks to move on. When you're thinking about writing, one of the secrets of the way that higher education works and the ways that you are working on campus, many of you, is that departments work with one another and they talk with each other. So I think it's effective for students to, in a place like Barnard, be reaching out to multiple offices when you're in search of resources. But it's also good to remember that folks on the other side of that email work together. And so very often I'll come across students who have emailed the dean's office, Beyond Barnard, financial aid, the bursar, all in search of the same question. And by doing that, you're expending a lot of additional work. And you're potentially maybe not aware that behind the scenes, the folks that work together as colleagues have already coordinated and they've identified the right person to respond to the individual with a request. So it's good to think about, before writing the same email and same question to multiple parties, think about who might be working together and whether it is effective or not to send multiple of the same messages to multiple people. And the last thing, the biggest thing, and I would say this is especially important with faculty, but I think it's really good practice across contact with anybody, particularly in higher ed settings, but I think in general, I'm always advocating for students who are reaching out. It could be if you are looking for a potential academic mentor in a lab. I know that many of you are science students reaching out to work with SRI folks. It could be reaching out to an alum, asking for an informational interview or to express interest in an internship. Keeping length to an absolute minimum wherever possible in email is better. It respects the person's time. It keeps, it demonstrates your awareness that everybody's inbox is absolutely crammed all of the time. I don't use that typewriter very much. I do have it. I'll just show you. I do have it right here on my desk. And I look at it and wish that I was writing a lot more often. That was a beautiful gift. It was like April of 2020, and my brother-in-law bought it for me at an estate sale, and my dad fixed it up for me. So, my fam is the best. What is substantively different about workplace email from the standpoint of being on the receiving end of them? So first of all, I went back and I looked at my GBear inbox for all 5 years, all 1,862 days that I have been at Barnard. And I see my colleague, Christine Valenza-Shin, joining, somebody I email more than anybody else. Hey, Christine, I just said that I email you probably more than anybody else in the world. So 1,862 days ago, I joined at Barnard. And if you look at I looked at my inbox last night, that works out to about 60 emails per day, including weekends, holidays, summers, etc. I've got more than 105,000 emails across the last 5 years. So the intensity and the pace of email in the contemporary workplace, I know that you guys all feel inundated. I guarantee you that many folks at Barnard who are on the administrative or faculty side, if you take your inbox and multiply it by some number, that's what we're talking about in a daily workday. I would say what's different about workplace email versus average student correspondence, or at least what I've seen coming to me from students over the course of the last 5 years, is that you all tend to write much longer emails with requests than I see from my colleagues on a day-to-day basis. This makes total sense. It can be anxiety producing, especially when you have a big ask to make, to work up the confidence to put together and ask an email. And then what ends up happening is, you kind of lay it all out, and things can get pretty long. And this is also something that I've seen with academics, frankly. There's a comfort level with sending long emails late at night where you feel like you're getting a task done. But unfortunately, long emails like that leave a lot to interpretation, a lot to misinterpretation, and can sometimes increase the length of time between the articulation of a problem and its resolution. And the last thing, I think what's different about workplace email specifically is that tone can be sometimes more formal, a little dry, and even a little bit inscrutable. Why is that? Well, I think that in the workplace, it is better to be safe and to assume that your email may be forwarded to the most senior person in the organization. This happens a lot. Emails get forwarded, for example, to my boss's boss, President Bylock, very frequently. And if my email is going to be forwarded all the way up the chain, I want to make sure that my language is clear, precise, short, to the point, friendly, and hopefully helps a student answer a concern. The longer an email gets, the vaguer the language that I use, the jokes that may be misinterpreted, the more room for misinterpretation there might be. So keeping tone a little bit dry, a little bit more direct, and a little bit more formal tends to be a good rule of thumb in the context of a college campus or workplace. What's often surprising about workplace email, by the way, they don't make them like this anymore. I said that about the typewriter. The picture here is actually from the post office in Mexico City, an amazing tourist attraction, a beautiful building. We're not sending letters anymore, unfortunately. So what's often surprising about workplace email, I think the fact is, and I'm not sure if many of you spend an inordinate time on email in the course of your campus roles that you have, but I'd love to hear about that in Q&A for sure, is the amount of time necessary for inbox management and the challenge of doing so, the challenge of keeping things straight. I think also the diversity of strategies for coping with volume. So some people are, my colleague, who many of you will know, Nikki Youngblood-Giles, her inbox has 130,000 emails in it. That would stress me out to no end. She never deletes or archives emails. I am an inbox zero guy. I try to get my inboxes clean and down to below 10 by Friday as I can, because I know on Monday things start to rev up very quickly. Other people love to use filters. They love to assign sub inboxes for different tasks. And I think that's great. That's just not something that I'm able to keep track of. What I would say to you is think intentionally about the ways that you might mobilize different organizational systems. Understand yourself and what makes you anxious, what makes you feel productive, what helps you get through tasks in your inbox. Think intentionally, in other words, about how to manage your inbox. Take some time to do it, and you'll get it under control a little bit more easily. I think a very surprising thing is the expected speed of responses. You may know this if you're in a student organization and you respond to constituents, or if you've been part of application processes, or even if you've thought of your expectations for response from administrative offices. It's very quick. People get tired of emails sitting in inboxes, particularly when they need an answer to a question. They get tired pretty quickly of waiting. And this is where the rock meets the hard place, right? If you're getting 60 to 150 emails per day, and each of those expects in the background a response with a 24-hour, 48-hour maximum turnaround, how can you possibly get out from under your email? And I'll talk a little bit about this in email do's and don'ts. I think the last thing to really call out is how tone in an initial outreach email can affect the response of the recipient of that first note. Tone in email can be so difficult to understand. And I think that's why kind of friendly and professional and bright and direct can typically elicit a quicker response. I think that many people often say things like, I know how full your inbox is, or I know how busy you must be, but I typically shy away from that. I typically don't call out how busy people are. They don't need to hear that. I don't think anybody needs to hear how busy they are or how crammed their inbox is. Instead, what I'm talking about with tone, a positive tone that says, thanks so much for your partnership on this, or let me know if you need additional time. I would love to have this in my hands by Friday, but if you need additional flexibility, just let me know and we can have a chat. Like being cognizant of different ways that you can make the ask easier for people to deal with, being bright, thanking people for their contributions, their labor, their work, their input. It's always well received. So I'd love at this point, just not to pause. I want to keep moving and going through slides, but if you want to put any kind of initial thoughts about these best practices into the chat, like some things that you're thinking about that maybe we can react to, no need to add if you don't feel like it, but I'd love to hear about your experience so far, things that you've seen, particularly writing emails in the college workplace environment for those of you who have to email as part of your job. But any thoughts that you have about the differences emailing with faculty, with staff, or with each other in a college context would be great. I'm going to move on in the meantime to some examples of email do's that I think can be really effective. So I want to start by kind of laying them all out, and I'll give you some specific examples. The first is to ask yourself, should this be an email or a conversation instead? Particularly with sensitive topics, with topics that require complex thinking, with negotiations, with having a difficult conversation to provide feedback, it may be better, instead of sending a very long email, to send a short one and ask for a conversation instead. Second thing, subject lines that are not just, hey. Make it easy for people right at the start to see what your email is about. This sounds really, really generic, but you'd be surprised how many, if you search your own inbox and look for just the subject line, hey, a lot of emails force you to open it before you actually know what's part of it. So something you'll see from my emails very often is, if it's an important update, I might say important : need your feedback on X. Basically, you use the subject line in order to call people's attention to matters that they might not otherwise flag in their inbox because it's so crammed. Who's your audience? Making sure that you are addressing your tone appropriately, given who you're reaching out to. Remembering that efficiency is task orientation. So leaving the email with just next steps. Here's what I'd like to have accomplished. Tone, I talked a little bit about. I'd add here, so I put assuming good intent, and this is a great Barnard SGA rule that I've really incorporated into my own kind of professional practice. People are busy. People do want to get back to you. the way that you may feel guilty about an email sitting in your inbox that you haven't responded to for several weeks, that's the way other people feel about your email that they've seen but can't get to yet. So it's important when you're both writing an email and waiting for a response to assume that the person has seen it, that they may be under a lot of weight of additional messages, and to hold off before, following up unless it's truly, truly urgent. Proofreading, 100%. I talk about this in my talks about resumes, cover letters, all sorts of different writing. Proofreading your emails and making sure that they're clean before sending them off is a huge, huge leg up to getting your email treated seriously. I'll say a few things about sign-offs. I see a lot of warmly and best and warm regards and your pal. And my kind of feeling on sign-offs is that thank you is the best, or sincerely, and keeping it very, very, very short. I also do always recommend including, if you're making a request in a professional email setting, some sort of gratitude or acknowledgement of patience, of work, of input, valuing an opinion, etc. And I think the final thing is you can call out when you are going to follow up, how you are going to follow up, and what is a good time to do so. And like I said, I'll go through some best practices. First thing you should ask yourself is, should this email be sent, parentheses, right now? I think that late at night, when we are responding to emails where maybe we have some feelings about, the best thing you can do is enable schedule send in your GBear, write a response, make it short, and schedule send it for the next day. Leave that schedule send in your outbox overnight, and then decide in the morning if it really should go out. I think there's also an impulse we've talked about this in leadership development events for staff at Barnard before. There's an impulse to make email a 24/7 job. So if you're responding to emails at 11 p.m., you may be putting pressure on the person who receives that email to respond immediately as well. So it may be that you're just getting to your inbox when you're able to get to it, but by schedule sending for the following morning, you may give people a little bit more leeway. I really suggest in addition to like schedule sending, write an email. If somebody, makes a request of you that you're just at your wit's end, or a tough conversation, I say write an email and leave it in your drafts folder. When I got married, I got a lot of advice about don't go to bed angry, right? That's a kind of traditional, 1950s kind of advice. But I think you shouldn't email angry either. Emailing while emotional, emailing while feeling that there's tension in the air is not a good time. That doesn't mean you shouldn't write the response. I totally say get it out of your system, write it, leave it in drafts, and then revisit in the morning to see if it's something you actually wanted to send. Emails can be really effective if you're getting let's say you are the recipient of a big 1,000-word email. My sister's famous for sending these, right? And I love her very dearly. I will often respond via email or maybe even via text and say, hey, I saw your email, was wondering if you might have a chance for a conversation later on this afternoon and we can go over it. Reaching out to the person who knows you, who's a colleague, who's a friend, and you're in a professional setting, emailing that person back and saying, totally understand where you're coming from, but I would love to get some time to talk through what sounds like a challenging issue. In other words, just because you receive an email, just because you receive feedback, a request, work product via email in a professional setting, that doesn't mean that email is the best way to respond. So I talked a little bit about subject lines that are not hey. Like I said, I'm going to call out a few things. So let's say request time off week of July 5th. I'm going to call out in the subject line that it's a request. If I'm reaching out to an alum asking for an informational interview, I might say outreach from Barnard College. If I'm reaching out to someone to invite them to speak on campus, I'll put invitation. People love invitations. They love to open emails that instead of asking them to do something, it's asking them to be a part of something. If you're following up, make it clear that it's a follow-up. After meetings, I love to send good follow-up emails. So thanks and next steps from Friday's meeting. If you're the person who sends a follow-up and keeps people on task oriented towards accomplishing an initiative, people will be likely to follow up. So using subject lines in order to call out specifically why you are reaching out. The second thing is, who is your audience? Email is surprisingly challenging when it comes to how do you reach out to someone. So I would say, for example, if you're in a professional setting or if you're seeking a mentor, if you're reaching out to faculty, on the first email, I would always go with Professor X last name. If that professor responds to you and signs with their first name, at that point, it's fine to switch to Dear David, let's say. Okay, so as soon as someone signs an email a particular way, they're essentially giving you permission to address them that way in a subsequent email. I do this all the time. I have a lot of students who kind of insist on calling me Dean Ehrenstein, and I think that's fine, but I always sign my name AJ, and I do that very purposefully. I want you all to get used to, in fact, treating someone in a position of some sort of authority at Barnard, treating them with their first name. That's something you'll get used to in the professional workplace. And I think it's worth it to get practice doing that now. There are other people who believe that, using the formal title doctor, professor is an expression of respect that they must, keep to. And I think that's fine to respect it, but keep your eye on how people sign off. I think it's also great to always show, the example, Dear Monica and Paul with Nathan CC'd, calling out who's on the email, where they are. That helps the reader kind of understand who's looped into the conversation. I don't like, hey guys. I don't like, if you're going to be addressing a group, it can be dear colleagues. I use colleague all the time at Barnard, or all, or everyone. I think in a moment of understandable increased sensitivity around pronouns and assignations and gender assignations, I think it's really good to try to use gender neutral language when you're addressing a group especially. Okay, efficiency equals task orientation. This is really about helping people find themselves in emails and understanding what they should be accomplishing as a next step. So for example, at Wanda, in an email to a group, I like calling out names of people who may be responsible for specific next steps. The second word bubble, I wanted to follow up on our conversation to identify 3 key tasks. That basically announces the purpose of the email and then alerts the reader that there will be 3 next steps. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of bullet points. And so calling out salient issues, making it easy for people to understand exactly what they need to do next is a big help for them to zoom in on what you're hoping to get out of the conversation and have them accomplish those tasks. So being task oriented and helping people locate what is expected of them is helpful. Tone. I keep coming back to tone, and that's because, especially in high stress situations, tone is the way that we all get in the most trouble. I will say one thing here about punctuation. Everybody knows the difference between getting a text, and I'm going to put this in the chat. The difference between what I just typed and what I just typed here. Thanks with a period in the text message. There's a great New York Times article that I'll try to dig up and send it as one of the follow-ups to the conversation, is like a deadpan thanks a lot, right? There's a lot that seems to be implied there. Workplace email in terms of expressions of gratitude can be more exclamatory, more exclamation points. I wouldn't overdo it, but being a little brighter and sunnier in your punctuation can, believe it or not, have a positive effect on the responses that you get. I like ending emails with, please let me know what else I can do to advance the project, or it was fantastic to meet you and I look forward to taking next steps. Leaving things off on a positive note can be an effective way to leave the reader with a good impression of the communication overall. I think when you get negative feedback in an email, when you get a challenging request via email, when you get a frustrated client or peer or someone you need to be responsive to in a professional setting, something like, I can certainly understand your frustrations and would welcome the chance to chat to get on the same page, can be really helpful. People want to feel acknowledged. They want to know that their problem is being heard. They want to know that someone is helping to address a situation that they are confronting. And so acknowledging someone's frustrations, and again, pushing people out of the genre of email, getting them to hear the honesty in your voice, the desire, the sincere hope that they can be helpful, can de-escalate situations and can result in a faster solution to challenges. I'm going to say it once again, just please proofread your emails. It just sends a much better impression to include emails that are, I mean, I compare these to my mom's emails, which are like E.E. Cummings poems. There's like punctuation all over the place and capitalization is totally optional. I'm sure we all have those people in our lives. But in professional settings, just making sure that the writing is crisp and clean is a real sign that you've paid attention and that you respect the time of the person who's reading. Again, on sign-offs, I find that this is the place where people tend to get a little personalizing in a way that maybe is not doing the friendly work that writers often think it's doing. So keeping sign-offs relatively direct, sincerely, thanks, exclamation point, talk soon, comma, instead of best regards or, yours very truly. Some people have a tendency to import conventions from letter writing into their emails, and it tends to come off as jokey and potentially not appropriate for a professional setting. So, and this is a personal opinion, by the way, and I should say that about all of these things. None of this is dogmatic, but in terms of keeping things professional and direct, a short sign off that stays away from kind of gimmicks, I find appreciated. Definitely, like I've mentioned, expressing gratitude and acknowledging the work that people have put into a project, an ongoing set of tasks, a difficult situation. Again, if your hope is to keep the mood of the interaction positive and professional, then thanking people for their feedback, their work product, their output. People love being thanked for their leadership. You can always thank someone for their leadership and they'll be delighted. It's a good way, again, just to kind of close off a conversation professionally. I get a lot of questions from students about how to either follow up after an email has gone unresponded to, or to, basically to send a professional follow-up. And I think there's a couple of things to say. A good follow-up is starts by setting a reader's expectation that you will follow up. So I love it when emails say, I'm going to follow up next Thursday if you don't have a chance to get to me by then. Great. By next Thursday, it would make sense that that person would be in my inbox again. So if you have an urgent request and you are hoping to get a response within the next couple of days, you can say, thank you again for your attention to this. Unfortunately, the matter is urgent, and I would plan to follow up in about 48 hours if I can't get a resolution by that point. You're then setting an expectation of when you're going to need to follow up. Now, I think you should reflect on what's reasonable and what is urgent. And of course, I know everybody's inbox, everybody's social media, the way that we just engage with information now, everything feels very, very urgent. But again, if you can simply reflect on when you actually need an answer in order to move forward, saying when you're going to follow up is the best prelude to having the permission to follow up later when you need to. I think people love being encouraged to reach out again. So if you're having a conversation with an individual and a colleague that you're working with, and you want to encourage them to connect with you for additional advice, just absolutely, always say, feel free to follow up. I'm here for your additional questions. That's a great way to signal to people that they're, they're not alone. They're not out on their own after this initial response. And just make sure that you understand that when you say that to someone, they will get back to you, right? I don't want you all to be victims of success, but when people understand that you're responsive, they tend to go to you as a source of resources and advice. And so be judicious about your invitations to additional questions and follow-ups, because people will take you up on it. Great question. So what if you have an email signature template with your name, college major, et cetera? How would the sign off look like? Would I still need to say best regards or something else? I wouldn't say best regards. That's one of the ones that I wouldn't. I would just say, thank you or thanks and end it. I do always add my name and then have an email sign off below it. So I will give you an example in case it's helpful. And let me try to walk and chew gum here. Like I said, I can have difficulties doing this. So even if you have an email signature, I'm a big fan of suggesting that you should still sign off the email. So the way this looks is, I'm going to stop this share. I'm going to share my inbox instead. Dear X, thank you so much again for your email. I've received it and will be able to respond later this week. Feel free to follow up if you need a response faster. Thanks. So I'm doing two things here. So first of all, this is how I would typically have a sign off and my signature. Sorry, I'm going back and forth here. This is a nifty thing to do when you have a ton of stuff in your inbox and you don't have time to get to a full response. Acknowledging someone's email and saying, thank you, I've seen this, and I plan to get back to you in the next couple of days is a great way to help someone feel acknowledged and let them know that you have indeed processed their question or their request, and to give them a specific timeline for when you can hear back. I get questions from students about what kind of signature they can use in their email address. And I'm actually a fan of students who add a little signature from in their Barnard account that says, student, sophomore history major, Barnard College, and then includes either you could just use the Barnard address. I think having a little email signature can look professional and I think is a net positive, but it's totally up to you. It's not something that I had in college, but that's the way that I would answer that question. So just a couple of more minutes and then we'll save time for Q&A. I want to talk about some practices that it would be best to avoid. And again, I mentioned that some of you may have done these things, and I'm not calling you out. I'm calling you in for discussion about how to improve moving forward. So the first thing is just replying all. Replying all can be the bane of people's existence, right? They can't get off a thread because responses continue to come in, and they come in for chains about scheduling where every individual replies to the entire group about when they're free. Be judicious about replying all and make sure that when you do so, you're doing so intentionally. The second thing, oversharing. I see this a lot with people who can't make it to the office, can't make it to class, can't make it to an event. You should not be sharing your symptoms about why you're missing things. So I find that this is one of the kind of etiquette transitions from high school into college. If you're sick, just say that you're sick and you can't be in class. You don't need to provide any other context. You can always say, I'm happy to follow up in case a doctor's note is necessary. But people typically don't need to hear all of the details. And if you're embarrassed to share them, the great thing is that you don't have to. People understand that there's reasons why we have to be out of the office, why we have to miss class, why we can't make it to a particular obligation. I think it's always great to say, I've gotten in the practice, and you all as students have gotten me up to this. My new best practice is to say thank you for your patience, or I appreciate your flexibility as I'll have to reschedule, as opposed to apologizing, because you don't have to be sorry that you're sick. Of course, you don't have to be sorry that something came up at the last minute and you can't make it to an obligation. I think a great construction in email is, I appreciate your flexibility and your patience, and I look forward to the opportunity to reschedule the meeting, right? That's totally professional and well within your right. I think we all apologize too much for things that are totally out of our control. And I think we can together address this in the way that we write our emails. I would say that it is really a good idea to use your personal email for personal correspondence. I wouldn't say that Barnard is the NSA in any way, but I think it's good for you to kind of keep a separation of church and state when it comes to your social life and your Barnard email, or your social emails and your Barnard emails. Keeps things cleaner. I am not a big fan of BCCing or blind carbon copying people because of Rule 1. I have personally missed the fact that I am BCC'd on an email. In other words, the sender didn't want the recipient to know that I was included in the conversation, but have then replied all to the conversation because I didn't realize that I was silently copied. People will immediately know that you were on the email, but were not included publicly. I've mentioned that exclamation points can be your friend in lightening the tone, but 2 and 3 exclamation points, lots of exclamations can really diminish the emphasis and the friendliness that you are trying to convey with the use of the exclamation point, and it can start to make you sound jokey. Emojis, I am not a fan of using them in professional settings in most cases. I do see, I think this is changing. I think that people will add a smiley face or to a thank you. I think it's just important for you to be intentional when you're using them. And I don't mean to make it sound like this is like over serious, but it is something that has crept more into the vernacular of professional emails and certainly chat in the workplace in the last several years. And so just be careful and keep them to a minimum. One of the things you will experience in the workforce as you enter it as the junior person on the team is that your youth and your relative lack of experience relative to your colleagues will unfortunately be often under the magnifying glass in the beginning. You want to be judicious about how you mobilize informality, humor, and emojis in a manner that you just have some control over. You want to make sure that you are conveying the tone that you want to convey to your colleagues. And so again, that involves humor as well. Jokes are very difficult on email. I learned this a very hard way, just, early in my career, being jokey in emails, and just having the meaning mixed. And it can get you into some hot water. So it's better, humor's best left to non-email genres. A colleague of mine gave me great advice when at the University of Chicago. Assume that every email that you send in a professional context will be forwarded to the leader of the organization. Just assume that every email you send could be forwarded. Another way of this joke being told is write emails like they could be subpoenaed. And I'm not saying this to scare or to try to suggest that your emails will get you in legal trouble, but it is good to just, before sending an email, ask yourself, if the president of the organization with which I am affiliated saw this email, what would that person think? How would it be received? I think it's good to avoid letting your inbox get out of control. And that's a personal decision. It's up to you as to how you want to manage the flow of information in your inbox. And I think it's also, I'll kind of close like this. It's good to choose when you are going to be in your email. I'm an early morning email person. I like to clear the deck before the start of the workday. Other people like to get it done in the middle of the day. They like to have other tasks that require a little bit more critical thinking early in the morning. But understanding what it is to you to feel like your email is being untended and trying to invest not big blocks of time in your inbox, but a little bit every day can be really helpful in keeping your inbox under control. And the last thing is don't email late if you can help it. Try to keep yourself focused on other tasks, or if you are writing emails to go out the door, send them for the morning or leave them in your drafts folder and decide if they should go out the door in the following morning when you can read them in the light of day. I'm going to stop there. We got about 10 minutes for questions. And I'll put my contact information back up. And I will also end the recording here, just because in case anybody wants to ask some questions that they don't want to have recorded on the on the video, then we can have a frank conversation. But to those of you watching at home, thanks so much. Be in touch. Please follow up aaronste@barnard.edu. You will get a response from me. And of course, follow us on all the socials. I will stop the recording there. Have a good night, everybody. And I will also open it up to questions.